Hi everyone, this is Andrew Prima, Ukrainian American, reporting from Kiev. In today's podcast, week 188 of Russian invasion of Ukraine, and this is the second week of October 2025. In today's podcast, we're going to keep on talking about the Russians keep striking Ukraine energy infrastructure, but Ukraine responds back. And we're going to talk about the Ukraine's future, how the war might end. When President Volodymyr Zelensky was asked about attack on Ukrainian infrastructure, he said that Russia must understand if it strikes Ukraine and threatens to black out Kiev, it will face a blackout in Moscow in return. Many people took this statement as at face value, and there is indeed hope that Ukraine is capable of striking Moscow in a way that would cause a blackout. So I'm asked whether there is any real evidence that Ukraine has such weapons and in such quantity to strike Moscow this winter. If we are specifically talking about Moscow, considering the air defense coverage, their capabilities, and let's say the ratio of their capabilities to ours, is one of the most protected cities in the world. Possibly the most protected is Moscow. For example, to clarify, the United States, despite being much more advanced in terms of technological capabilities than Russia or China, doesn't have such a layered, diverse, and sufficiently effective air defense system. Considering the development of air defense and echelon Russia, I believe, without exaggeration, is probably number one. They have questions about how to use the systems and about training. They are also not perfect and face various issues. However, in terms of the variety of methods in tiering, they are number one. And regarding security, Moscow ranks first. Kiev's truly lack means that could effectively pass this defense. When we talk about Ukrainian deep strikes, they are slow and quite difficult. Yes, they reach their target because we are constantly working and Ukraine defense forces are actively involved and our design engineers are continuously improving them. However, for a few drones to hit a target, many drones are lost along the way, lose control, some got shut down, but still managed to get through. We don't have modern missiles that are effective, long range, and compatible to the Russian ballistics Iskanders and cruise missiles calibers. Ukraine can deliver precise strikes to various locations, and as a result, our defense forces always carefully and for a long time consider which target to attack, where they can bypass electronic warfare and evade air defense. That is why combined strikes using missiles and drones are employed to, on one hand, exhaust the air defenses, and on the other hand, create an opening when the air defense are reloading, allowing the most effective weapons to hit immediately. Can Ukrainians deliver precise strikes to the enemy? Yes, they can. They are working on it, and it's constantly being improved. Can we, if we consider this as a pure coin, cause a blackout in Moscow? No, unfortunately, we cannot, objectively. I really want to, but I believe that even if we set this as a goal, the resources we have would just be exhausted without achieving anything. If we're going to if we're gonna work, then work and focus on targets we can actually reach. Do it as carefully as possible, selecting the most effective goal, which is what is currently being done by the Ukrainians. So, regarding Ukraine receiving Tomahawk missiles that can actually improve our chances to hit Moscow or other important targets. And this is one of the most discussed topics, not only in Ukraine, but also in the US, European Union, and of course in Russia. What would we launch actually these Tomahawk missiles from? Let's get back to the technical components. The missile is primarily launched from the ships like destroyers, cruisers, and submarines, which have a special Mk-41 vertical launcher. Ukraine doesn't have ships or vertical launchers. All Tomahawk launches historically have been from the fleet. That's the fact. Secondly, at one point, a program was developed to launch aircraft platforms. The Americans themselves, back in the late 1970s and early 1980s, recognized it as ineffective, impractical, and shut it down. Aircraft platforms, that aircraft that would launch Tomahawk, do not exist in reality. As far as we all know, Americans have not gone back to this. Recently, some information came out suggesting there were experiments, research, and development efforts. But nobody ever found any confirmation or reliable sources, official or unofficial, to prove the fact that it actually works. The third category is ground based launchers. They existed in the form of launchers called Gripon. In 1987, the United States and the Soviet Union signed an agreement on the limitation of strategic nuclear weapons. And if you remember, it was signed by Reagan and Gorbachev. These ground based launchers fell into this category and were removed from service. However, in 2019, Donald Trump withdrew from this agreement. After that, the Americans returned to ground based launchers and developed new ones called Typhoon. These were really put into service already in 2022, and there are four ground based batteries in the world. Only four. The Americans are not selling them to anyone and not even considering this. At present, besides the United States, only one country owns Tomahawks, which is Great Britain. The cost is less than $4 million, and it's not about the money. They can give us, or Ukrainians, the Tomahawks, but what will launch them from? I repeat, we do not have a fleet, and Tomahawks are not launched from the aircraft platform, and Typhoons, only four batteries in the world, which are not transferred to anyone. The Americans have stated this countless times at different levels. It is still unclear what will happen in this regard. Maybe Trump doesn't know this. Maybe Zelensky doesn't know this. Maybe some secret has emerged that we are unaware of, but I've never seen information from any reliable, qualified source about the launch of Tomahawks from anything other than the vertical launchers Mk-41, which we currently don't have. So this is a big question. Even United States gave us the Tomahawk missiles. How are we going to be able to use them? So Ukrainians understand there's a three scenarios for Ukraine's future. So Ukrainians understand that a full and fair victory in this war is currently unattainable. Such a victory would involve regaining about 20% of the occupied territory, Russia paying multi-billion dollar reparations, and the international prosecution of Russian President Putin and other top Russian officials for the war crimes. At the same time, Ukrainians are also convinced that Russia will never meet Putin's goal of fully taking over Ukraine and installing a collaborationist regime in Kiev. So, new diplomatic dynamics between the US and Ukraine has been developing. So, Ukrainian officials have been reluctant to reveal what Donald Trump's next step regarding Ukraine will be, but they believe that the last month meeting in New York between Trump and Zelensky established a new diplomatic dynamic between the two leaders and their countries. The meeting resulted in notable progress on several issues: unlocking Russian state assets, increasing economic pressure on Russia, expanding Ukraine access to the US weapons, and discussing a major deal to produce drones together. During his discussions with the Ukrainian leader, Donald Trump reaffirmed the United States' readiness, along with Europe, to support the creation of a special fund that could provide Ukraine with up to $90 billion in long term loans. These loans are to be backed by more than $300 billion in frozen assets, and Ukraine will be able to use them to immediately purchase Western weapons without waiting for reparations from Russia, which may not be paid for many years, if at all. While Trump didn't explicitly use the word sanctions, he informed the Ukrainian side that he supports the punitive tariffs and restrictive economic measures against Putin to pressure him into negotiation peace more quickly and willingly. These measures include actions against Russia's largest energy companies and, along with Europe, against countries like India and China that continue to purchase Russian oil, thereby supporting the Russian economy and Russian war machine. The Ukrainian delegation provided Trump with a detailed list of weapons the country wants to buy, including extra air defense systems and long range missiles like Tomahawk, which the Biden administration had previously blocked. Ukrainian officials emphasized the need to respond proportionally to the Russian strikes on their air infrastructure, especially energy facilities. After this meeting, Trump publicly stated that Ukraine could and should reclaim territory seized by Russia, calling the latter a paper tiger with a weak economy. The parties also agreed to start work on drone deal that would greatly boost Ukraine's production capacity to 20 million drones annually, with half designated for the war against Russia and the other half sold to the United States. Representatives from both countries are already in talks discussing the details and identifying which types of Ukrainian drones, air, sea, or ground, are of most interest to Washington. Against the backdrop, Zelensky has reaffirmed his willingness to meet Putin without preconditions, possibly as early as November this year at the G20 summit hosted by South African President Cyril Ramaphosa. There is no choice but to move forward and as quickly as possible. One of the strongest impressions I had while I had was that the war is increasingly becoming a race of technology rather than a struggle for territory, although one certainly influences the other. The advanced drone technology used by both sides has greatly expanded the so called death zone on the front line, the area where soldiers cannot survive and tanks cannot move without risking destruction. Today, it extends for 20 kilometers or more. We are all witnessing another revolution in military affairs, a former Ukrainian defense minister said. The victory will go to the side that finds solutions faster. The task of our technological ecosystem is to evolve faster than the enemy and thereby lead to the functional defeat of Russia by strategically neutralizing its capabilities. We see that the war has become a battle against time rather than land. Ukraine faces a Russian army that is quickly adapting to Ukraine's defense technology advances and using its large scale production to fight Ukrainian innovation. Russian drones, often produced in Iran, now fly as height of up to 5,000 meters, or I would say 3.2 miles, making them hard to intercept. Russian countermeasures are evolving so quickly that any new Ukrainian drone becomes outdated within 2 months. Engineers work alongside soldiers and race against time to stay ahead of the enemy. As a result, close in artillery has become obsolete. Instead, the Ukrainian military relies on three main types of weapons: multi rotor drones equipped with weapons and first person view controls visual for holding the front lines. Then advanced artificial intelligence powered interceptor drones designed to fend off Russian attacks, long range drones aimed at striking airfields and targets inside Russia, including oil refineries. Estimates vary, but experts believe Ukraine has disabled between 20 and 35% of Russia's refining capacity, undermining the Russian economy and likely increasing the sense of vulnerability among Putin and his circles. However, the minor of the strikes is not complete. The mirror of the strikes is not complete. Ukraine avoids targeting civilian objects while Putin makes them a priority. In the West, much discussion revolves around Ukrainian war fatigue and Russia's numerical superiority. It's often emphasized that Putin is waging a long war of attrition, hoping the West will lose its resolve and Ukraine will lose its resolve and the Ukrainians will to resist will weaken. I also sense that societal fatigue, but a much stronger feeling persists that Ukraine has no choice but to keep fighting the Russian aggressor. The cost is too high, and the surrender is simply unacceptable and will be more expensive for the Ukrainian state. Ukrainians are proud to have achieved what once seemed impossible. Containing Russia for over 3 years and 7 months, it's fantastic, and nobody ever believed in Ukrainian strength. This struggle has not only strengthened their military strength but also shaped their national identity and brought them closer to the dream of European integration. Ukrainians understand that their main vulnerability on the front lines isn't with themselves, but with the uncertainty of American support and Europe's limited capabilities. Many here fear that Russia feels more confident with backing from China, North Korea, and Iran, without which Moscow couldn't finance harm and sustain the war. So, the first and least desirable scenario is a prolonged war of attrition that favors Russia due to its numerical superiority, stronger military and industrial capacity. Almost as dangerous is what Ukrainian officials call a false peace, when Russia temporarily stops the fire, but on conditions that do not ensure Ukraine's security or protection from future aggression. The most likely scenario is a fair and sustainable peace, where Ukraine temporarily cedes some of its territory but gets European troops deployed, security guarantees from the US, and a far faster route to European membership. Now, in Ukraine, it seems that the third scenario has become more likely than at the start of this year, when the Trump administration hesitated about Ukraine's future and Europe's indifference risked its stability. Today, President Donald Trump has started to offer Ukraine more robust support. In Europe, according to the Oksana Chuparenko, a visiting senior fellow of the Atlantic Council, there has been an awakening and awareness of the threats to its own security, which gave Ukraine a second wind through military, political, and financial aid, including additional sanctions against Russia. Here in Ukraine, the war against Russia has become a mix of high level diplomacy with the US and Europe, an urgent technological race, covert operations against a quickly adapting enemy, and increasingly deeper strikes on Russian territory that are expanding and reshaping the battlefield. Ukraine will prevail, and Ukraine will stay independent and prospering state. Thank you for listening. If you like my podcast, share with your friends.